Hello and welcome to another episode of TalentED. I'm your host, Dr. Skanson. Today we have an incredible guest joining us, Alia Latorre. Alia is an award-winning educator, fourth-generation teacher, leading voice in universal design for learning, or what we call UDL. With over 14 years in public education across both California and Nevada, her background includes a decade in special education, progressing from classroom teacher to district trainer. She holds a certificate in UDL literacy, change management, and is working toward her doctorate in leadership, which is congratulations on that. What we know is through her dedication, Alia is transforming these educational spaces to be equitable and adaptable for all students. And I'm thrilled to welcome her to the show to discuss how UDL is making a difference in our schools. Welcome, Alia.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Skanson, for having me here.
Yeah. So let's get right into some of the I guess the personal things. Where are you talking to us from today?
Sure. So I currently am in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I'm part of Clark County School District as well. We are the fifth largest school district in the nation. So that is where I'm coming from you from. Yeah.
All right. It's really been a treat to kind of have side conversations with Alia, talking about UDL. It is a very valid strategy, a curriculum strategy, and I think there's a lot of misconceptions around it. So I'm really happy to kind of take this time today to talk with you, and hopefully people are going to listen, and we can clear up some of those misconceptions. So I guess the first relevant question here is, what is universal design, and why is it so impactful to both educators and students?
Absolutely. So there are a lot of misconceptions about universal design for learning. So I want to take us to kind of the creators, if you will, of like who discovered UDL. So CAST, they were formerly known as the Center for Applied Special Technology. And according to them, Universal Design for Learning, they kind of coined the term UDL, is an approach to improve and optimize teaching and learning for everyone by setting clear, rigorous goals, anticipating barriers that are in the environment, and then proactively designing to minimize the barriers. So UDL is really a framework that's informed by neuroscience. So while scientists have identified thousands of neural networks, there are really three classes of brain networks that have been identified as instrumental for learning. And those kind of go hand in hand with what UDL is built off of. So the affective neural network, those networks kind of monitor both the internal and then the external environment to establish priorities for learning. It's engagement and motivation, essentially. So the affective networks really do establish kind of the why behind learning. Recognition brain networks are the second pathway. They perceive information in the environment and then they transform it into that usable knowledge that we want students to gain. So that makes this network really responsible for interpreting the what of learning. And then the last neural network is the strategic network. And so the strategic networks really plan and organize and initiate those purposeful actions within the learning environment. So they outline more of the how of learning. So this knowledge really of the brain networks, kind of coupled with research findings from the learning sciences, creates that foundation for universal design for learning. So the UDL framework itself consists of three principles that help guide the design, the selection, and the application of teaching and learning approaches. So we have those three brain networks, but then we have these three principles, and those principles really include multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and then multiple means of action and expression. So if we can strategically create learning experiences based on these three principles, it reduces the barriers to learning, it embraces student variability, and it creates the space really to build learner agency. And learner agency is the ultimate goal of universal design for learning. But most importantly, it's really the key goal of the educational system as a whole. So that's
Yeah.
kind of UDL in a nutshell.
Well, and a concise big nutshell. How's
Yes,
that? Um, well, and I guess if I could plug you at all, it this is why you should have somebody who really knows it, really
absolutely.
knows it to help guide it and to be able to answer those nuanced questions about why and why would we put this much front end work into things, um,
Yes,
uh, so that it is concise. And we talked about the learner being the center of kind of the design here. I think that's so important. Uh,
absolutely.
Tell us a little bit. I mean, you how can I say this? You know what you're talking about, okay?
Thank you.
It's
I think so
very
by
clear
now.
that you know what you're talking about. Um, tell us about your journey with UDL and like what inspired you to have this amount of dedication to this framework.
That's a great question. And I'm going to kind of work backwards because I feel like so right now I serve as a co-chair for the Universal Design for Learning Higher Education Network. So we're really focused more on what does UDL look like in post-secondary
Hmm.
atmosphere kind of thing. But I also have 3 levels of certification in Universal Design for Learning through CAST. And my doctoral research is going to be in the area of Universal Design for Learning.
Okay.
Obviously, I'm passionate. Um, and then I've kind of done so I'm currently doing and I have done in the past professional learning for the state of Nevada as well as international conferences and things like that. So that's kind of where I am now, and then I'm going to work backwards from there
Okay.
because I think that all of that is great. However, the most significant really contribution to my expertise in UDL, what really got me to love it so much was applying the framework as a classroom teacher. So in the classroom, I was able to experience the significant difference that UDL made in the educational outcomes of my students. And I have a special ed all the way background, but it's resource. So it was really interesting because I was able to see it not only in my resource room, but when I would go into the general education classrooms and kind of co-teach or support my students in that setting, I could see that what a difference UDL was making for them, even in those areas. So it didn't really matter what setting they were in. I could see the transfer. It was great to see, to kind of watch that generalization take
Mm-hmm.
place. So I not only saw significant academic gains, but I really saw a drastic increase in that learner agency, which was really exciting because my students became more purposeful in their learning and more reflective about their practices. And UDL supported them in ways that helped them really connect their knowledge to the concepts being taught in the classroom.
Mm.
They also became really a lot more resourceful and strategic, just as learners in general, and they were therefore able to meet more rigorous learning goals. Um, and then realistically, UDL, it was great for my students, but UDL also helped me become a better educator
Mm-hmm.
because it not only created the opportunity for learners to build agency, but for me to build agency. And I became more reflective about my teaching practices and a lot more able to kind of purposefully and intentionally plan my lessons. So UDL basically gave me like a roadmap to create just a more inclusive classroom. It allowed my students really to come to the learning environment as their authentic
Mm-hmm.
selves. And I was able to more easily recognize and respect their variability as learners. So it wasn't that they were a barrier to my teaching. It was really like my teaching. How am I going to make sure that what I'm teaching them is accessible and I'm decreasing the
Mm.
barriers that I'm placing kind of in front of them, inadvertently, of course. But my teaching really became more of an iterative learning process
Mm-hmm.
rather than simply like a checklist or a to do. So I really focused a lot more on, am I educating my students? Am I getting them to internalize learning so that they can apply it when they go to the other classrooms or, in a novel situation? Can they do that successfully rather than simply just going through my day saying, oh, okay, checked it off. I taught
Mm-hmm.
that lesson. I did that standard, moving on. Let's keep going. So UDL really grew me as a teacher, probably just as much, if not more so, than it grew my students as learners. I
Mm-hmm.
felt like I really became such a better educator. And what happened was my learners and myself, we co-created the spaces and we co-created that learning design together. And that made such a big difference in my classroom culture as a whole.
Well, I was going to ask you, how does it actually improve educational outcomes for students? But I think if anybody was listening there, you see how the agency, the student agency is embedded throughout. And I love what you said about your own teaching, because I often think as educators, as teachers, when our presentation is chaotic, when our lives are chaotic, when our lessons are chaotic, that impacts students. And
Absolutely.
our chaos should not impact student learning. So UDL really helps us as teachers, as educators, hone in on the most fundamental outcomes that we're looking for. Um,
Absolutely.
in your opinion, do you see like additional benefits for schools or educators uh, when they experience and implement UDL? So I mean,
Oh,
like
yeah.
what are the bonus chips here?
Yes. So I think that it's really interesting because I have seen it, and UDL, if you're doing it correctly, it's really not only benefiting the students, but it is definitely benefiting educators because it shifts mindsets, completely shifts them because you're building your lessons essentially from a different framework than you were
Mm-hmm.
previously. So what's interesting is right now in most of our educational systems, I won't say all, but a lot of them are really designed to kind of categorize learners.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're really familiar with terms as educators like gifted learners or learning disabilities or other labels that we place on students or types of students. And what I love about Universal Design for Learning is that it really challenges labeling and categorizing learners because that's really any sort of category is just an oversimplification of the complexity of learning as it stands. So UDL shifts that educator mindset towards inclusivity, and it builds the capacity that teachers and leaders need to see variability as largely systematic because
Mm-hmm.
we're all variable. And it is predictable. You can still think of categorization in a way because there are certain things that we're predicting, right? Like there are linguistic barriers
Mm-hmm.
to if students that are learning English for the first time. That makes total sense. But we can see that it's just part of the system and we can plan for it proactively. Also, we can think about it more so instead of saying, oh, okay, that's a barrier in the student, it's really thinking about what's the predictability across the brain networks that are part of that foundation of UDL. So when we're thinking about the affective recognition and strategic networks, we can think about this in a way that empowers us as educators to design flexible options to meet rigorous educational goals, but they're rigorous in a way that it reaches a much wider audience than we're used to. So the other thing is that I really appreciate about UDL is that it emphasizes the learning environment and the context in which education takes
Mm-hmm.
place. So by embracing those principles of UDL, educators can become aware of the ways in which environments create barriers to learning. And they can proactively design the learning environment to eliminate these barriers for that variability and the diversity that we see in our student populations. So I think that this inclusive approach really, again, and I know I've experienced it, it improves the climate and the culture in classrooms that utilize that UDL framework. And that climate, that culture can spread across campuses. It can spread throughout entire districts because I come from a little district where we
Mm-hmm.
started that, and boy, it spread like wildfire. So,
Those are pretty big bonuses, everybody. If you were
yeah.
listening, I mean, that's when you think about the added benefit of bringing UDL into your classroom, into your schools. You're talking culture, you're talking organization, many benefits. But it is a big investment, right? It's a big front end investment. We talked about that. Um, Given the demands that educators have right now, I mean, what would you say? Why should they invest in their professional learning time when that's
Mm-hmm.
precious into
Mm-hmm.
understanding and applying UDL?
Absolutely. And I think that that's a really good question. And we should ask that of any professional learning that
Mm-hmm.
we're going to invest in, anytime that we're thinking about that, because like you said, time is precious, resources are precious. Um, so as I'm looking in, and again, I'm in a large district, we do a ton of PL. We have a lot of moving parts, and I'm part of a lot of these different initiatives that we're doing. And what I've found is not only in my district, but in doing research about other districts, um, that despite that significant, right, financial investments, time investments in
Mm-hmm.
education, the anticipated improvements that we've kind of been looking for in student outcomes, they haven't materialized. They haven't really happened for us
Mm-hmm.
yet. Um, and we can think of that too, especially, I know a lot of people talk about COVID, but really, especially after the disruptions that were caused by COVID related school closures, if we take a moment and really self reflect on whoever's watching this video, right? If you take a moment and really think about your student data, what does it look like based on what's your ROI? What's your return on investment
Mm-hmm.
right now? And kind of just chewing on that for a moment. Our education system as a whole is really grappling with nationwide teacher shortages,
Mm-hmm.
declining morale among both students and educators, and increasing teacher attrition rates, all of which are really compounded by a decrease in post-secondary student enrollment.
Yes.
So many professional development initiatives, they aim to address these challenges, but they often do so in more of a piecemeal way where they're just addressing kind of we're focusing on implementing just specific programs to target
Mm-hmm.
one particular crisis rather than tackling that underlying issue or underlying issues that really require systemic change. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that that's the key term right there is systemic change. So universal design for learning offers a transformative solution because it does shift mindsets and it provides a comprehensive framework that not only enhances individual learning experiences, but also has the potential to really reshape that entire education
Mm-hmm.
system. So UDL is also great because the framework, and I'm totally honest with UDL, it's a conceptual framework, so you have
Mm-hmm.
to really think of things in a new way. But they know that's a hard shift. They being the creators of UDL. So what CAST has done is, and we'll talk about that later, but they just kind of revamped the UDL guidelines, but they do provide us with UDL guidelines that are kind of used as a scaffold for implementation because a lot of people say, okay, this is great. How do I do this? Like what does this look like in my
Mm-hmm.
room? We do have the UDL guidelines to kind of help us scaffold and implement that. But UDL is really a lot more than just a set of guidelines because we also have to be careful not to use the guidelines as that checklist. Like, oh,
Right.
okay, I offered this, I offered that.
Done.
Um, it's really a holistic approach that supports educators in improving their practices across all levels of education. We're not just focusing on I'm only going to target literacy with this PL. You can, but UDL is that foundation upon which those other PLs kind of take hold.
Mm-hmm.
So we can think of this as a way to really revamp everything that we're doing from early childhood to post-secondary settings. By embracing UDL, we can also address workforce development. I think that this is huge. Workforce development and upskilling needs, because we can use UDL when we're doing our own
Right.
internal professional learning. So we can ensure that education really remains relevant and responsive to the demands of today's learners and tomorrow's learners and the next day's learners, whether they're in our classrooms as students or on our campuses as the professionals that we're trying to help develop and grow. So to sum it up, I guess the strength of UDL really lies in its ability to restructure the very framework upon which education is built. So
Mm-hmm.
it makes it such a powerful tool to combat the challenges that we're currently facing in our education systems. And by adopting that UDL framework as the basis of everything that we do, we can create those meaningful, lasting improvements in teaching and learning that address the root causes of our current educational crises.
Mm. Powerful, powerful, powerful. Very convincing as to why we should invest our time and effort. Um, I'm gonna switch gears for us for a second, and I've got just like a couple three fun questions I want to throw out just so that we can get to know you a little bit better. Um, One thing I want to know, if you could instantly master any skill that you currently don't have,
Mm.
what would it be?
Oh boy. Off the bat, it would be anything having to do with technology, like
Huh?
software, AI, any of that. Because even, let me tell you, we've used Zoom for how many years now? Every time I have to like go, wait a second, how do I turn this on again? How do I get to this again?
Right.
So I have to remind myself constantly, tech is not my thing. So anything technology wise, I would love it. So if anybody watching this video wants to like send me a little message about tips and tricks, I'm happy to
You
take it.
take it. You would take it. How about this one? What's one book that every educator should read, in your opinion?
Ooh. So, oh my gosh, there are so many. However, I think that one that is really sticking in my mind right now because it's again so powerful, and I think that it has a lot of potential to shift how we do things as educators is Dare to Lead by
Mm,
Brene Brown. Oh my goodness, because she talks so much about vulnerability. And as educators, and tell me, you don't have to tell me, but think about this for a second. How many of us were told when we first became teachers, don't smile till December?
mhm,
Right? So we were taught really early on in our careers or by our mentor teachers or even our own educational experiences. I had teachers who didn't smile the whole year, um, to not be vulnerable.
mhm.
That showed that was weakness, and that Dare to Lead book really teaches you that vulnerability is courage and vulnerability is bravery. And you have to have that in order to build trust with your students, is how I kind of see it. So I think every educator is a leader, first of all. I don't care what you're doing. I don't support staff are leaders. Everybody is a leader in education because you're leading the future of our entire world.
Wow.
So if you can read that book. It'll change the way that you look and do things in your classroom.
Last one. This is easy. You're going to an ice cream shop. You have all the flavors in front of you. What's your go-to? What are you
Oh
picking?
man, in a perfect world, I would pick anything that has like multiple layers of chocolate, because I'm a chocolate kind of
Yeah,
girl.
yeah.
Yep, in a perfect world. Now, if the, you know, health conscious Aaliyah was in my mind at that moment, I would probably say, "Oh no, I'm just going to get like the fruit toppings and eat a fruit salad."
Yeah.
Uh, no, the bad version of me that really wants that, it wants that chocolate.
You're
Yeah,
gonna take it all. I love it.
yep. And then I'm
Um,
just going to combine it.
so Aaliyah, we're kind of coming to the end of our time here. I'm gonna turn it over to you for kind of a personalized call to action. Um, what's your one nugget of truth that if they're only gonna pay attention to one thing, what would you like to tell people today?
I would like to tell people today, if first of all, thank you for being here and listening for a little bit. But if you only take one thing away from this, um, UDL is what we need to shift every outcome that you are concerned about in your district right now. UDL is the underlying foundation of how that's going to happen. You can have all these other initiatives, and it's great. And you can still have those other
Hmm.
initiatives, and you can still do all of that. But it starts with that base layer of learner variability is okay, acceptable, expected. We want it because otherwise our world is not going to be diverse in the way that we need it to be. And that the barriers are not in students, they're in our learning environments, and we have got to reduce them,
Mm,
at least, hopefully eliminate them. So my nugget is UDL is the foundation of everything you do. So trust me, dig into it deeper. I promise you, you'll like what you see.
wow. Aaliyah, it's been fantastic having you on the show. For our listeners eager to learn more about UDL,
Mm-hmm.
um, certainly you can get in contact with School Pro and we'll get you connected with Aaliyah. But is there another way if people wanted to get a hold of you or connect with you, how could they find you?
Absolutely. They can find me. I have my own website, but of course, School Pro is probably the easiest way to get in contact with me. But I do have it. It's amlatorreplc.com. There's also, I offer a free mini course on there about just four kind of key concepts that underpin UDL. So that
Hmm.
if you're like, I'm not quite sure yet, and you want to just kind of dig into it a little bit, super short mini course. It's absolutely free. There's just a little Google form you can fill out. So that might be a good way to get a little more information and then learn
Perfect.
some more about me.
Well, thank you, Aaliyah, again. It's been fantastic having you on the show.
Yes,
That
thank
brings
you.
us brings us to the end of another inspiring, hopefully, episode of TalentED. And like I said, today we explored the transformative power of universal design for learning, or UDL, with the fabulous Alia Latorre. To our listeners, if you're interested, like I said, in professional learning around UDL, please contact us. Don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to support you in making positive changes in education. That's what we're all about. So until next time, stay PKS, which is positive, kind, and supportive. Thank you, Alia.
Thank you, Dr. Skanson.